Hi everybody, this is Gianluca. I am a portrait drawing coach. So basically I teach people how to draw portraits. I'm pretty good at it. And in today's video, I wanted to talk to you about edges and the importance that edges have in drawing and painting. Um, so the first thing I want to do is I want to like explain briefly what do we mean by edges when we talk about edges. So when we talk about edges, we mean the meeting of two planes, right? So for example, if you have a cube, okay, you might have one face of the cube and another face of the cube, and the meeting of the two planes, that's going to be the edge, right? Or for example, if you have um, the Asaro head or the planar head, you might have like the front plane of the head and the side plane of the head. And the meeting of the two planes, that's going to be the edge, right? Now, there's many kind of edges. Some people simplify them by saying, for example, there's soft edges, hard edges, firm edges. That's fine. But if you, for example, learn to draw the a hard edge, a soft edge, and a firm edge, which is kind of a like an edge in between the two, between a soft and a firm and a hard. You can basically draw anything because actually, when you uh, if you are starting to use a new tool, for example, new medium, I don't know, you starting to use charcoal, for example, or you starting to use oil painting. Um, if you learn to draw a soft edge and if you learn to draw a hard edge, you basically have the mastery of the medium, of the tool, right? Because by learning these two things, to create a hard edge and a soft edge, you learn to create a transition. So you learn to model the form, and you learn to make hard edges or like contours, for example. So basically, if you learn hard edges and soft edges and firm edges as well, you can draw anything. Now, if you, for example, go and look at there are certain drawings that I see online in which the edges are all very like simplified. You can see, like, for example, the shadow edges are all the same. The contours are all the same. The lines are all the same. Now, later I'm also going to talk about the similarities that we have in when we talk about edges and when we talk about lines. But like, if you go and look at uh, drawings online, like, you can see there a lot of them, they have very simplified shadow edges, for example, and that make it like it doesn't look real, right? Of course, because nature isn't simplified like that. If you go and look at a portrait from life, if you go and look at a live model, and you look at, I don't know, the shadow here, okay, on the chin, you can see, even like, I don't know, from here to here, you're gonna see a lot of variation in the edges. So you're gonna have, I don't know, a moment where it's a little bit harder, a moment where it's a little bit softer, and it's gonna vary throughout the length of the whole shadow, right? So making it, now, of course, as artists, we cannot, because we have limitations, we cannot imitate 100% reality, because, like, nature is a lot more complex than we can even comprehend, so we have so much control at our disposal, since we have a limited tool. But we need to exhaust the tool. We want to do everything we can with the tool that we have, right? So for example, if you're using oil painting, you can do a lot more. You have a lot more possibilities than you have if you're using charcoal, right? So, but you want to use it all. You want to exhaust the tool that you're using. You don't want to simplify too much, because otherwise it's gonna look fake. It's not gonna look real. It's not gonna look like nature. It's gonna look like cartoony, and you don't want that, because you're trying to, as an artist, I mean, of course, I'm talking to representational artists, like people that want to represent reality on a piece of paper. So if you want to draw cartoons, you're free to do it, but I'm not going to be able to teach you that. But so we want to represent reality as loyal as we can, and so we need to understand it as best we can. So now that I've talked about the more like general aspect of edges, so I said there's soft edges, hard edges, we could start to talk about a little bit more specifically about different kind of edges that we have into different parts of a drawing, right? So for example, when we talk about a portrait, we might have a transition, so from one plane to another in the light, for example. We might have a shadow edge, we might have a form ending edge, an edge that is representing the ending of form, right, of a structure onto the face, for example. So like, let's break them down a little bit, little by little, all of them. So you might have, for example, a transitional edge, which is the most we could say the most difficult to make, because of course you need a lot of control of your medium, because most of the time it's gonna be like very, very subtle. You're gonna have very subtle transitions between the different planes, and this happens when you are dealing with the light and you are dealing with halftones. So for example, you have the light and you want to create a form which is soft, and if it is soft, you're drawing a soft form, and so you're gonna have to make it you're gonna have to work a lot to actually be able to make it soft, because especially if for example, if you're using charcoal is very soft medium, it's very complicated to control, and so you're gonna have to work a lot to make it subtle enough, okay? And the difference that we have in between the transitional edge and the shadow edge, for example, is that a transitional edge doesn't stop, right? So for example, you have the light, okay, that's coming from a direction, and it's hitting the form, and the light it travels through the whole light shape, okay, but it travels on different planes, so every plane has a different orientation, right? And so it's gonna be hit in a slightly different way from the light, and that's gonna create the different plane, the different values that you have on the form, which create, of course, the form that we have, the illusion of the form. And when we are going to describe it, when we're going to go and draw it, we want to describe it with very soft transitions, with now of course it depends on the form, but usually you're going to have a very like soft gradations from one plane to another, because of course the light it's still hitting the form, right? So you want to, as some of my teachers say, you want to draw the light onto the object. You don't want to draw the object per se. You want to draw the light hitting the object. You want to envision the light that is hitting the object as like I don't know, water that's flowing down like a river. Okay, very poetic. And so when you envision this, you understand that when you're going to draw the light shape, you want to make it very unified. You want to make it very subtle so that it travels very smoothly. Okay. And so, for example, like I used to make this mistake a lot. Sometimes I still make it, which I tend to make the halftones inside of the light too dark. Okay, what that does is it breaks the light, it breaks the flow of light, and you don't want that because you want to have a very unified uh, light shape, which actually helps with edges, because when you go and draw soft edges, you want to have like the closer the values are, the more subtle the transition is going to be, because it doesn't, like, for example, if you're drawing the light but you make a too big of a value jump between two planes, you're gonna have, even though you make it very very soft, you're still gonna have not a very subtle transition because there's too much of a gap in between the two planes. Okay, so you want to make it very soft, make it very subtle. And usually when you go for example, if you start to paint, you might want to also use, instead of using value changes, you want to use temperature changes. Okay, you don't want to use now of course there's always going to be a value change because you need it to turn the form, because if the two values are the same, the form is not going to turn. It needs to be a little, even just a little bit different, but it needs to be different, otherwise it's not going to work. But you can turn the form by using temperatures. You can without using values too much, because if you make, as I said, too many value jumps in the light, you're going to break it a lot, and it doesn't work very well. But so as I was saying, a transitional edge, it's very subtle, it's very soft usually. Now of course sometimes there's going to be some planes that are a little bit sharper, some halftones which are a little bit darker, so that makes a little bit of a sharper edge, but it's going to be a continuation of the light, because the light doesn't stop, opposite and compared to a shadow edge, which is like you have the light, okay, that's flowing onto the form, and at a certain point it stops, right? And you have the shadow. Now the shadow is, of course, okay, so a shadow is the absence of light, but usually when we draw, like when we observe nature, even though the shadow is the absence of light, there's always going to be light inside of the shadow, because we don't have one light source. Usually we also have, like, we have even if you're drawing from if you have one light, if you have a studio with one light source, you're still going to have light coming from different directions, like bouncing from, like, from the floor, and hitting the shadow edge, the shadow. So it's gonna make it not totally black, okay, totally empty of light. But like, the shadow is the absence of light. So for example, if you look at I don't know, the moon, okay, when you see the moon, the half moon, you can see that half of it is without light, and you can see it's totally black because there's no other object that is reflecting light inside of it, right? Because otherwise you would see the whole moon with a shadow with a reflected light inside of it. But so the shadow edge is going to be where the light stops. And now, of course, you're going to have different shadow edges. You're going to have very subtle shadow edges, very soft, very hard. Depends on the form, of course. If you, for example, if you have a form that is more like this, you know, very steep, you're going to have a very hard shadow edge. But if you have a form that is more, you know, very subtle curve, you're going to have a very soft shadow edge. Even depending on the light that you're using, if you're using artificial light, you're going to have a harder edge in the shadow. If you're using natural light, like north lighting, for example, you're going to have a subtle shadow edge, which is more difficult to draw, but it's also actually more beautiful in my opinion. It looks more natural because it's natural. But yeah, you have a shadow edge, which is the meeting from light to shadow, right? And so now, of course, we could talk about. So one thing that I didn't say before is, so for example, if you have a shadow edge, okay, the thing that makes it soft is actually the amount of planes that are in between the shadow and the light. So for example, if you have a shadow and then you have a light, they are meeting, and then in between there's going to be other planes and other values, which makes it softer. And the more planes you have in between, the softer it's going to be. The least you have, the harder it's going to be, right? So for example, if you have a cube, you only have two values, because you have a very, very hard edge. So yeah. And then you have the last edge, which is the form ending edge. Now the form ending edge, can be many things. It could be the contour, for example, of a portrait of the subject, the contour of my head, for example, which is a lot different from the shadow edge, for example. Now, when we go to describe it by using lines, you have to describe it differently, because otherwise you're gonna get you're gonna get confusion. You're gonna get it's not gonna look good. And so what you want to do is you want to make the shadow edge softer and a little lighter, and you want to have the contour a little bit sharper and a little bit darker, so that you create like the contour as a hierarchy is going to be a little bit more important, right? Because it's of course it's the boundaries of the form, so you want to give it more importance. Now, of course, when you're drawing a form ending edge, like so when you're drawing the contours, you can have different edges, you can have different variety, and that's when we start to talk about line quality, which is a whole other topic. But generally speaking, you can have different edges in different line quality in different parts of the drawing, depending on the light situation, depending on the interaction between the background and subject. I don't know, depending on the depth. So something that is going to be more like towards the back is going to be a little softer compared to something that is going to be, like for example, if you have if you're drawing my face, to create the illusion that this is a three-dimensional object, you want to make my nose a little bit sharper, and you want to make my jaw a little bit softer, so that you you can, are able to say that this is a little bit back compared to the nose, which is a little bit more in the, the front. It's protruding forward compared to the jaw. As I said, it's a whole other video that I'm gonna make. So yeah, and so you can actually describe the contour with lines, but you can also like translate it, that contour that you're describing in lines, you can translate it into values, right? So for example, if you're drawing a portrait with values, so you have a background, you have the portrait with the background, and you have everything, you can use the lines that you made in a line drawing, and depending on how you made them, like on the kind of softness and darkness, you can use those in a more like organic drawing with values or painting, right? But a form ending edge is usually, so it's going to be the contour of an object. So my, the shoulder that you see, that's going to be a form ending edge, which is very important, and you want to make it, as I said, a little bit harder, a little bit more clear, a little bit more defined compared to the other kind of edges that I talked about earlier. So now I could talk for a lot more on this subject, but I'm already at like 20 minutes, so I don't want to bore you too much. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Now, as I said, now leave a like if you enjoyed.